Yo, what's going on everybody? My name is Safely, and today I'm bringing you guys a brand new video. So in today's video, we're going to be going over why I don't like H3H3. Now, I'd like to preface this with the fact that I used to enjoy H3H3 quite a bit. I loved Ethan's content and thought most of his videos were genuinely good, and he knew how to pick somebody apart. I guess you could say that I like the old H3H3 or the pre-podcast H3H3. I personally feel like once Ethan started focusing on his podcast more, the quality of his videos started going downhill, and that can be seen by simply comparing his old videos pre-podcast to the very few videos he puts out now. Now, as of recently, Ethan is in a bit of hot water, which essentially stemmed from the recent update of YouTube's stance on harassment, with Susan stating that their stance was directly crafted from what they heard from interviews with creators, and with Ethan being one of the creators that recently spoke with Susan, you can see why it was easy for people to point fingers. It doesn't help Ethan's case that one of the videos critiquing him, which led to a lot of controversy and backlash towards him about a year ago, was taken down as a result of this harassment policy being implemented. I will say, whilst the video being taken down and Ethan being one of the few creators who had direct contact with Susan is quite suspicious, I don't personally believe there is enough evidence to say that Ethan played as big of a role as Keemstar has suggested. I'm a firm believer in innocent until proven guilty, and until I see some concrete proof, I'm gonna have to stay neutral. I will also say that Ethan's recent activity on Twitter also has not helped his case. Keemstar and other YouTubers called Ethan out and blatantly asked whether Ethan had involvement in the harassment policy, and rather than refusing the involvement, Ethan proceeded to call Keemstar a clown and avoid answering the question entirely. Now, like I said, I don't believe there is enough evidence to completely convict Ethan of these allegations. However, his recent actions on Twitter don't help his case. Ethan also went out of his way to talk about the situation on his podcast, where he seemed to have a complete misunderstanding of what Keemstar and the other YouTubers were getting at.
So we were talking about Killer Keemstar, who was, of course, in the absence of evidence, willing, as always, to perpetrate conspiracy theories about me. Wouldn't it be the first time? Keemstar is obsessed with me. He really is.
Really, he has it out for you.
And I think that, I mean, well, besides me
it's
openly,
because you said you didn't like him.
Yeah. He has a problem. His fragile little clown heart was hurt when we did the podcast, and then I said afterwards in a comment that I hated him, even though in the podcast itself I repeatedly tell him how much I disliked him to his fucking face.
So you really think that Susan, the CEO of YouTube, came here to meet us to talk about you and another guy that made a video about us? Really? You think that's how she uses her time?
He's obsessed with me, dude.
Yeah.
You want to know how I met?
Came here and we talked about some guy that we don't know that made a video about us. That makes total
sense. The CEO of YouTube came out to hear me bitch about that.
He essentially bounces around and talks about how Keemstar is creating a conspiracy theory, whilst also addressing his dislike for Keemstar. He defends his stance previously defended on Twitter, saying that he made it very clear during the podcast with Keemstar that he disliked him, even though Keemstar, amongst other creators, noted that Ethan was nothing but kinda Keem during the podcast, and states that he did not make that clear whatsoever. This situation alone is not why I dislike H3H3. Whilst it is a contributing factor, there is a multitude of other reasons for my opinion. One of the things that was touched in the H3H3 critique video, which was taken down due to the new policy being implemented, was the fact that Ethan is quite the hypocrite. It is not uncommon for Ethan to talk down on other YouTubers for certain things, and then turn right around and do the exact same things he complains about. One big example is shown in his podcast where he responded to Keemstar. He claims that Keemstar is obsessed with him, and so on. Not to mention, one of the main things that Ethan was getting at in his video he posted to Twitter in response to Keemstar's allegations is how Keemstar is constantly bringing up other creators in his videos, which should be no surprise as Keemstar is a host of a drama channel and is paid to cover what happens with other YouTubers. But Ethan literally made videos on Jake Paul, Logan Paul, Ricegum, and all of these other creators and got exposure from them as well. Now, I know you guys have heard me bring up Ethan's podcast multiple times in this video, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Ethan's podcast is one of the worst and most unenjoyable podcasts I have ever seen. And when I say that, I don't say that lightly. It is genuinely so forced and unenjoyable. and I just honestly can't stand it. One thing I love about other podcasts, like for instance the Joe Rogan podcast, is that they are natural and free-flowing, and they also allow room for the guests to speak and give their input on certain topics and questions. Ethan's podcast, however, is the exact opposite. Ethan was exposed quite a while ago for literally writing down exactly how he wants his podcast to go, down to the most minute detail. Now, having a plan for what you want to ask a guest is not necessarily bad, but when it gets so deep that you literally don't let the guests talk or express themselves, as well as talk over them and only let the stream go in one direction, that is a problem. The way Ethan leads each stream and the fact that he writes everything down the specific way he wants things to go leads me to believe that he is uncomfortable with thinking on the spot and is incapable of being a good host. Now, don't get me wrong, Ethan was a great creator, and like I said before, I used to genuinely enjoy his videos. They were well constructed, thought out, and showed Ethan's personality pretty well. I think a problem that Ethan has is he treats his podcast like he would a YouTube video, leading it one way, planning out everything he's going to say, and essentially trying to lead it to get to exactly what he's thinking and put that out there. But the issue is, because a podcast is so much different than a regular video, you can't plan it the same way. It should be free-flowing and comfortable, and his podcast is just everything but that. If you don't understand what I'm getting at, a great example of this is his podcast with Bill Burr. Go watch that and you'll see exactly what I mean. Now, for my last topic, I want to address that Ethan is an absolute snake. Over the years, he has backstabbed and tried to go after a multitude of different creators, which he once called friends. DMs have been exposed, and it's honestly just so crazy to me. You'd think that a situation like this would happen only once and Ethan would learn his lesson, right? Well, no. He did this with Leafy, Pyrocynical, and Keemstar. He constantly complimented Leafy in DMs, I'd go as far to even say praised him, and then releases a video going in on him and critiquing his content. He was respectful to Pyro in DMs and supported him, and then he goes and says that he dislikes him and that he shouldn't have a platform to defend himself. And as for Keemstar, Ethan had the audacity to have him on his show along with other guests, and then after the show talk about them behind their backs and essentially treat them like garbage. As I said earlier, Ethan tried to defend himself on the situation with Keem on his podcast, but it's an absolute dumpster fire. He's already been contradicted on Twitter, and it's very clear he's reaching for everything to make him look like he's in the right. Now, for the million-dollar question, what can Ethan do to gain back the respect which he once had and redeem himself? In my opinion, he'd have to do a multitude of things, starting with an apology. And I know this wouldn't happen, considering Ethan has, right now, one of the biggest egos I've ever seen, bigger than Mount Everest, if you would, but it would be one of the smartest things to do. He should start by apologizing to his fan base for essentially being the snake that he is, and then publicly apologizing to the people that he has wronged. The next best step would be to genuinely reformat his podcast so that it actually works. Bullet point questions are fine, but a fully constructed podcast where the guest is potentially on strings is not okay. Let it flow freely, let it be comfortable, and let the guests lead the podcast so that it's actually interesting. But yeah, guys, this has been my stance and reasoning for why I don't like H3H3. I do want to remind you guys that this is just my opinion. If you like Ethan, that is great, power to you, but for these reasons, I'm going to have to disagree. Anyway, guys, I hope that you did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to smash that like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you are new. I make videos like this all the time, so if this is something that you like and want to see more of, make sure to hit that sub button if you're new, and like I said, drop a like on the video. And yeah, guys, I will see you in the next video. Stay safe.